So there are a couple of basic activities of doing activity recognition. One I'm thinking of as model-based action recognition. So you have some way of getting the pose or the appearance of a human body, and you're going to relate these descriptions of the change of pose or appearance to some action labels and probably build a classifier or something like that. And one of the main challenges in doing that work is, are your data that you use from training taken from a different context than the data where you're doing the actual recognition? These problems tend to be pretty easy if I have training data from the place that I actually, and the camera in which I want to do the recognition, and are much more difficult if the training data come from a different source. Model-based activity recognition basically assumes I've got some low-level process for either detecting actions, maybe probabilistically with some noise, and then what I need to do is recognize the overall activity by comparing it to some, I put structural representation of the activity, something that defines how the different actions relate one to the other. One of the reasons I sort of like talking about it this way is it's sometimes reasonable to get lots of examples of the low-level actions, so you can do our traditional building a classifier to do that, but harder to get lots of examples of the overall activity. There's some change in that lately in terms of using large data sets. I'll talk about that a little bit, but in some sense those are a somewhat artificial problem. When you do this, you have this problem of handling uncertainty. That is, your low-level detections are uncertain and your descriptions vary, and you have to be able to recognize the activity in the presence of this uncertainty. And some of the major challenges are, just can you keep track of which part is which, who is who? If you've got multiple things going on in a train station, there's lots of ambiguity and occlusion, and being able to say what the activity is sometimes difficult when you're subject to those variations. Recently, there's been some work where you actually don't do as much about that. You just view activity as sort of a big space-time pattern of some sort. So you're not actually tracking bodies, or you don't even know there are people there. You're basically just describing the overall pattern of motion, and you typically train a classifier. We'll mention that just a little bit here, but not spend a lot of time on that. Also recently, and this was kind of, I found it kind of funny, there's been doing activity recognition from a single image. And you might ask, how is that possible?
How is that possible?
Okay, thank you, Megan. I didn't really want her to say anything. Yes, how is that possible? Well, look, here's a picture, okay? So you see that it says, imagine a picture of a person holding a flute. Well, you don't have to imagine. There it is. You could say, what are they doing, right? And you could say, they're playing a flute, right? Playing a flute is an activity. So even though I'm only recognizing a particular pose, in fact, when I go like this, you can almost hallucinate the flute being there, right? Even though it's not really there, and you can think about whether that's a vision problem or an AI problem or a hallucinogenic problem, but whatever it is, the idea is that you're recognizing activity from a single pose, and I don't really think of that as activity recognition. What I think of that is representative image recognition, right? This is sort of the canonical image that you have in your mind of the pose of a person doing that activity, so you're recognizing the pose in the context. You might even be recognizing the flute as is here. I guess you could play fruits too, I don't know. You could recognize the flute, and that helps you see that they're doing flute playing. But to me, it's kind of a far cry to call that actually activity recognition in terms of anything like video.